Your report details how Brookfield uses subsidiaries in low tax jurisdictions like Bermuda and related party debt arrangements to reduce taxable profits. Could similar opaque corporate mechanisms be used by public office holders or their associates to shield ownership or economic benefit in ways that undermine the spirit of Canada's Conflict of Interest Act?
Absolutely. The use of subsidiaries in tax havens, the use of trust structures can both shield public office holders from taxable, from having their income taxed as it was intended to be in Canada.
You wrote that Brookfield provides only the, and I think it's a direct quote, bare minimum, end quote, of disclosure despite its ESG branding. So given that the former Brookfield chair, Prime Minister Mark Carney, has built a public reputation around transparency and responsible capitalism, what minimum disclosure standards should apply to public office holders to prevent hidden offshore holdings?
Well, I think the use of blind trust is not an appropriate method for dealing with that issue. And I think investments in assets should be fully disclosed for any public office holder to make sure that they are living up to the spirit of the law and paying tax along with other ordinary Canadian citizens who, in general, I assume their income is taxed from their payroll deductions, and there's less ability to use offshore bank accounts and advice from high-powered accountants and tax lawyers in order to avoid their obligations to fund domestic services in Canada.
So that's interesting that you've said effectively that blind trusts don't work in this case for the purposes of the Conflict of Interest Act. So given that, what specifically would you suggest replace them? For example, we've had witnesses who have supported the notion that divestment, which currently in the Act is either placing controlled assets in a blind trust or their liquidation, to only allow for assets to be sold and then for the proceeds to be placed into trust and then managed by a portfolio manager. Would that type of solution satisfy the lack of transparency or the ability to hide the details that you've suggested that it might?
Yes, I do think that approach deals with the issue. If you're liquidating the assets and then putting the proceeds into a blind trust, I think that sufficiently covers the problem there.
So the report highlights cases like Canary Wharf in the United Kingdom, where Brookfield generated significant revenue but paid very little local tax. What lessons are there for Canada in terms of tracking the true location of economic activity and profits?
Yes, firstly, on the Canary Wharf investment, the UK tax authority has since investigated further and required that investment to pay money. I think that the setup of that investment was largely to avoid future payments of capital gains on the investment rather than the ongoing rental income from the Canary Wharf property. In terms of what Canada should do, I think it's very much overdue for Canada to adopt a public country-by-country reporting regime. So Australia has just done this, and that is going into effect this coming year. The European Union has also done this, and that is coming into effect this next year as well. Australia's version is significantly stronger, and this requires, in the case of Australia, any multinational that operates here with over 10 million in revenue is required to disclose all of its basic financial details, profits, losses, revenue, related party revenue, number of workers, in a list of 40 jurisdictions that are widely regarded as tax havens. So this would include places like Bermuda, Singapore, Cayman Islands, along with Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong, and many other jurisdictions that are commonly abused as tax havens. It's hard to fix a problem if you can't see it, and I think transparency is ultimately the first step, and we would strongly encourage Canada to follow suit of both Australia and the European Union in requiring disclosure for all multinationals.
5 seconds.
Just very quickly, would banning the use of tax havens by public office holders allow for more transparency for Canadians?
Quick response, please.
Yes, I think that would be an interesting idea to pursue.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Ward. You spoke quickly. It was very impressive, and you gave our interpreter a lot of work. I'll try to speak a little bit more slowly. From the start of our study, since the start of our study, I've been asking two more theoretical questions. I don't have the same expertise as you, but I do have a similar expertise, and so I'm hoping that both of our expertises will be able to converge. Do you believe that tax avoidance, even though it's legal, is it moral?
A fantastic question, and I will try to slow my speech, but I do not think it's moral. I think that people have an obligation to contribute to the society and the public services, and I think even though it may technically be legal, the problem is that much of this law was written by corporate lobbyists and is not to the benefit of society. I do think that there's significant need for greater transparency and reforms to close loopholes that were written into the law for the benefit of wealthy individuals and large multinational corporations who have undue influence over the tax system. And I think that, there's one important development to make here. I think that with the Trump administration in the United States, the ability to progress through multilateral processes has been severely gutted. But I do think that there's an emerging opportunity through the United Nations Tax Convention that is being developed now in order to really take a fundamental look at how the global tax system has been misshapen for the benefit of a few and to the detriment of the people and the planet. And I think that there's some golden and urgent opportunities for reform. And I think that there's also opportunities for Canada to take a leading role in pushing forward for greater transparency.
Before I move on to my next question, you quoted a series of studies earlier. I know that we could look into those, but I was wondering if you would be able to share these documents with us so that they could be objective elements to be included in our report. If you could share them with the clerk, that would be appreciated. I see you nodding, so thank you. Now, it's not because something is legal that it is moral. And another principle that I've been focusing on is that ethics requires more than law and legislation. A code of conduct must have a larger scope. Now, following what you've said on Brookfield, I'm even more concerned than I was at the start of our study. From the beginning, I've said that we're in a never-before-seen situation. We have a person that used to lead this company who is now Prime Minister. And we have few tools because of our legislation in order to frame an appearance of a conflict of interest or a real conflict of interest. We limit a conflict of interest to an individual's impact. But if we're talking about a general impact, well, people in the ethics commissioner seem to say that it's not a problem, whereas there can be a conflict of interest. Brookfield could be making a lot of money, even if the prime minister has a blind trust. He might not know how much his fortune is increasing, but he can still benefit Brookfield's assets. So we're dealing with a case where things aren't necessarily transparent and clear regarding morality. I'm going to stop there, and I would like to know what you think of what I've just said.
Yes, I completely agree. First of all, I have supplied links to the documents that I referenced to the clerk, so hopefully those will be shared with you. And I do think that it's incredibly important for a leader to set a moral standard, and that it's highly problematic that that the company that he was chair of for many, many years was engaged in very highly aggressive tax avoidance and continues to be, and is also investing in international assets that are privatizing infrastructure, not delivering services to the people as was intended, and taking advantage of generous tax concessions that should be, in the case of Brazil, allowing more people to have access to basic sanitation rather than lining investors' pockets from the proceeds that are partly derived from public subsidies going to this industry. I think that there's serious moral questions about that present major problems on the tax front, and also on how profits are extracted in a private equity model that is all about short-term gains, and leaving aside the question of societal impacts.
Monsieur Thériault, et comme
Monsieur Thériault, as Mr. Ward stated, we do have the links to the documents. I spoke to the clerk. We will be translating the documents. So we will be translating all of that, and we will share it with the committee members.
Thank you. So my name is Jason Ward, Principal Analyst of CICTAR, the Center for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify. I come to you from the unceded lands of the Darug people, more commonly referred to as the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney, Australia. So I'll begin with some brief opening remarks. I'm not an expert in Canada's Conflict of Interest Act, but I do have significant expertise in the abuse of tax havens and trusts. CICTAR has done some relevant work in relation to tax avoidance by Brookfield, and this mostly occurred during the period when now Prime Minister Mark Carney was chair of Brookfield. In the lead up to the federal election in Canada and following the election, our research on Brookfield has received renewed interest in Canada and globally. In addition to Brookfield, we've also done numerous reports and some unpublished research related to tax avoidance and the use of tax havens by several of Canada's largest public pension funds. So I'll review some of the relevant research very quickly, and then conclude with some simple recommendations for greater transparency in Canada. So our first research relevant was done in January 2021, and we published a report in English entitled Tax Dodging by a Canadian Crown Corporation, Rivera Living Making a Killing. That looked at PSP, the public sector pensions 100% ownership of Rivera. And due to the incomplete reporting and the lack of available public information, we examined Rivera's ownership of care homes in the United Kingdom and found significant use of tax havens and tax avoidance on the ownership of those assets. We published a similar report in February 2021, which was facing the UK rather than facing Canada. And that report was called Darkness at Sunrise, UK Care Homes Shifting Profits Offshore. In February 2022, we published a report in both English and French on Orpea. It's now renamed EMIS after a major scandal and a collapse. Orpea is the largest care home company in Europe, and CPPIB, the Canadian Public Pension Investment Board, was the largest shareholder for over a decade. The English version of that report was entitled Caring for People or Profits, the Financial Engineering of Real Estate Investment of Group Orpea. And then on the same topic, but for a Canadian audience, and focused on CPPIB's failure of governance and loss of 500 million Canadian dollars in workers' retirement savings. In October 2024, we published another report in both English and French. The English version was entitled CPPIB's Orpea debacle. Orpea was using undisclosed Luxembourg subsidiaries to shift profits away from shareholders, including CPPIB, into the pockets of management who actually served some jail time in France. And the company was eventually bailed out by the French government. Our first report on Brookfield was published in June 2023, called Brookfield's Bermuda Base is Canada's largest alternative asset manager dodging global tax. And it looked at previous research on Brookfield from Canada and also 4 international case studies to identify the use of tax havens and tax avoidance by Brookfield in multiple countries. In February 2024, we published a report in Norway entitled Kindergarten Landlord, Should Norwegian Taxpayers Finance Profits for One of the World's Largest Asset Managers? And that report examined Brookfield's investment in Norwegian kindergarten real estate and the impacts of public funding on that. In May 2024, we published a report in Colombia called Brookfield's Isahin, a case study on the need for change in the global tax system. This report examined Brookfield's profit shifting via Bermuda from its investment in Colombia's largest hydropower electricity generator, which had been privatized previously. And most recently, in September 2025, we published a report on Brookfield's tax avoidance on privatized water and sanitation services in Brazil. The English version of the report was called Water Down Investment, Top-Up Returns, The Pitfalls of Financing Basic Sanitation in Brazil. That primarily looked at the abuse of public subsidies that Brookfield has taken advantage of to avoid tax payments in Brazil. We've also made a detailed submission recently made public to the New South Wales Parliament inquiry on Brookfield's failed ownership of Healthscope, the second largest private hospital company in Australia. The company is now in administration, and its troubled hospital in New South Wales has just been returned to public ownership. It's also worth noting that Caisse de Dépôt Quebec, CDPQ, was also a significant investor in this hospital company. Our submission examines Brookfield's extensive tax dodging and use of tax havens on the Healthscope investment and a range of other investments.
Yeah, sorry, we're over time quite a bit. So I'm gonna have you wrap up right there. There may be some questions that come your way that you can circle back to what you were going to say.